Hello, welcome to Counter Currents. Today I'm interviewing and talking with a friend and a goat, the greatest of all time, George Galloway. George has been a leader in fighting against these mindless wars for years and was one of the most important voices in the world with these issues. I hope you enjoy. Is there any hope for Europe with respect to Trump derangement syndrome, or is it just going to get worse?
I think it's going to get worse, and the madness of the liberals is unconfined. It's absolutely irrational. And we're now being, if you like, supplemented by the fleeing liberal class from the United States. I see Ellen DeGeneres has just arrived in England. And who knows who else? Bono didn't drive off a cliff, you know. He definitely will pop up here in Europe. And it looks like there's going to be a stream of them. What they are fleeing, of course, is very hard to discern, because all the things they say that Trump is, they already are and were in power since 2020, doing all the things they say that Trump is going to do. And so it is a derangement syndrome. It is, I think, easily classified as a mental illness.
Yeah. Well, we pick up from time to time these news reports, and I don't know if they're just exceptions representing an aberration or really present a trend. But England really appears to be approaching the status of an authoritarian state, locking up, a woman reportedly praying outside an abortion clinic, not saying anything verbally, but just praying, and is scarfed away. The journalists that
visibly praying, the charge sheet read, visibly praying. I'm not sure even that she was visibly praying, but that's what she was charged with. Yes, you're right, Larry. This, whatever the opposite of the land of the free is, it's us. Our journalists, some of them very big names, some of them, one of them, a former British ambassador, the Honourable Craig Murray, arrested at the airport under the Terrorism Act. I interviewed a man just this week, a distinguished 79-year-old university professor, not just any university, the School of Oriental and African Studies, a Jewish Holocaust surviving 79-year-old distinguished professor who was arrested under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act for a speech that he made, which would have offended supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, personally, I thought that put the tin hat on all of these arrests. How you could even dream of carting a 79-year-old off in irons. And then when you discover actually he's Jewish, actually he's a Holocaust survivor, actually he's a distinguished and famous professor. But they did. They put him in irons and took him away. Now, they're not proceeding with the case. They're not proceeding with any of these cases, but it's intended to chill, and it does chill. Little Richard Medhurst, the young Larry Johnson, the young George Galloway, he's been effectively put out of the game by now coming up for 6 months on bail, not knowing if they're going to proceed with a terrorism charge for journalism. I mean, you thought that Julian Assange's case was an aberration. I'm afraid not. It was the training manual.
What is the reaction of the British public? Are they just bowing down and going along with this, or is there starting to be any pushback?
I'm sorry to tell you, the reaction is zero. And one of the main reasons for that is the vast majority of the public know nothing about it. If you are not on social media, which is still a very large number of people, you definitely know nothing about it, because none of these arrests, none of them have appeared even in the most liberal newspapers. Nothing, zero. Zilch. These names and cases I've just adumbrated are completely unknown to the mass of the people. Those who do know, of course, include the section of the population that used to hate that sort of thing, but have now fallen in love with it, as long as the people to whom it's happening are people that they politically disagree with. And you've got that kind of people in the US also. People who used to hate the three-letter agencies, always checked under their bed to see if the three-letter agencies were hiding there, are now the biggest advocates of these three-letter agencies. And that's happened here too. So of the people who do know, substantial number of them know and approve.
Well, what's the situation with the social media? Because here in the United States, we have seen a dramatic, decisive shift away from traditional media, away from the cable news, away from the newspapers, and finding that the social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, a variety, that they've become much, much more important. Where for example, Judge Napolitano has now got 500,000 subscribers. MSNBC and CNN would kill to get numbers like that, and yet you can do it without the overhead. It's really provided an alternative outlet, which has made the liberal, I don't even want to call them liberals. This, whatever this thing is, this authoritarian fascist manifestation.
Yeah.
It's making their heads explode. Are you seeing a similar thing in the UK or not?
Yes. I mean, all of that is also true, perhaps not to the same extent. So, for example, we still have a big newspaper market. You never really had any national newspapers. We've still got several national newspapers. I mean, as opposed to the LA Times, New York Times, and so on. But we've got newspapers that are bought from one end of the country to the other, and there's still quite a number of them, and they are irredeemably vile, as you can perhaps imagine. We've still got the BBC, which is hardly watched at all by people under 30, but is remorselessly watched by people over 40, people over 50. Older people are sitting at the BBC all day, and that's irredeemably vile. Then you've got this issue, which you have too, that social media contains platforms which are themselves vile. So Facebook and Instagram are owned by a vile individual, and if your views don't fit his, your face will not go far. I, for example, have almost 1 million followers on Facebook. But if I did a video, if I released this video of you and I talking, only 2,000 or 3,000 of them would be offered it. It would only be shown to, 2,000 or 3,000 of those followers. Twitter's the only, Twitter and Rumble are the only relatively free space.
Yes.
I'm suing Twitter in the High Court in Dublin very soon, not for anything the current ownership did, but the previous ownership and its false labeling of me constituted a defamation, and I'm suing them. But nonetheless, I say that Twitter X is the freest space that we've got, but only on some subjects. So it's not a case of chalk and cheese. There's no freedom in the mainstream media, but there's only limited freedom in the social media sphere. Shows like yours, like Judge Napolitano's, like mine, we have millions. I have 4 million people a week watching the mother of all talk shows. 4 million. In British terms, that's a phenomenal audience. But that still means there's 65 million people not watching it. And that's just in Britain. So we can never we can never rest on our laurels on these things. There's still way to go.
I would add, I'd add BitChute there as well. In fact, I know the owner of BitChute personally, Jeffrey Worthen, And
I'm not aware of that platform.
yeah, I'll send.
Let me know. Yeah,
you send the information. Be happy to introduce you to him because he's he's older than me and you, and because you and I are the same age. But he is firmly committed to free speech.
Good.
And he's Jewish, but he allows criticism of Israel. He doesn't require you to genuflect before the Zionist cause. And so
I very much look forward to that. I mean, our show last night, for example, was broadcast live on TikTok. I didn't even know you could broadcast live on TikTok, and I'm not sure I've ever looked at TikTok, but it's a newer than the others, and there are others too. Rumble. I've never seen Rumble, but they tell me our show does well there, and they've never sought to censor us in any way. But the other day we had to leave YouTube 20 minutes before the end of the show so that we could interview our good friend Scott Ritter, because YouTube have already told us if we feature Scott Ritter on our show, they'll pull the show. How's that for overweening media power? So, of course, we couldn't bow down to that. And so we did the whole show on all platforms and the last interview with Scott everywhere except on YouTube. So you're all the time walking on eggshells as long as other people have got the ability to close you down, to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I understand. Listen, they pulled my platform, completely deplatformed me on YouTube. In terms of my name, Sonar 21, Larry Johnson, for quote hate speech, and it was like, well, it come to me and say, hey, what you said is hateful, and give me a chance to either explain or defend myself. You don't even get that. I mean, this is like the jackbooted Nazis across the board.
And you're just waiting for them to come in the door of the studio and take you away, really.
Yeah. But I did watch your show last night with you had Danny Davis and Aussie the Cossack. Yeah. So it was a great show, and I was sitting there thinking, boy, I'm surprised YouTube hasn't pulled the plug on him. Not because you're saying anything wrong or offensive, but
I think in my case, because I was an elected member of Parliament over a period of nearly 40 years, and kind of well known, they probably think it would be more trouble than it's worth. But that calculus can always change. And of course, the fact that we're racking up very, very large numbers on their platform, which they promptly sell to their advertisers. I'm astounded at some of the ads that turn up on my show. I'm sure they didn't consult me about whether I want them to be advertising on my show, but that's not how it works. So there may be a commercial pool also, but again, you never know when it's all going to end. But I started life, Larry, literally on a soapbox, talking as far as only my voice would carry, and I'm ready to do that again if necessary.
Well, I can recommend, if anybody's ever bored, go to YouTube, and then again, this is one of the positives of YouTube, and search for George Galloway. The number of videos with you, both at Oxford and at Cambridge debates, and the different speeches and presentations you made, it's really riveting. Both you learn something, you'd be impressed with your oratory, as well as your ability to make an argument. So it's just I recommend.
Well, I wish I had a dime. I wish I had a dime for every view.
You'd be a genuinely wealthy man. Okay, let's go to the elephant in the room. Why is Britain deciding that it wants to go to nuclear war with Russia? What is driving this?
There's an ancient and peculiar hatred amongst the British elite for Russia. It long predates Vladimir Putin. It even long predates the Bolsheviks and their revolution over 100 years ago. It stretches back into the 19th century. when Britain and Russia were imperial rivals, when their empires literally rubbed up against each other. And Ivan and Boris have been figures of hate in the British elite, and they're barking dogs in the media ever since. And if you think about it, almost exactly 100 years ago, Mr. Churchill took 100,000 British soldiers into Russia. This is not the first time we've been bombing Russia. 100,000 men who had just fought the First World War and thought they were finally going home were instead shipped to Murmansk, Archangel, and the frozen ports of the Russian north, and were encamped there as an occupying army. Ditto the French, by the way. When you hear the French talking about sending their soldiers to Odessa, that's not the first time the soldiers have been there. They were driven out of Odessa in 1922, but the French also had 100,000 soldiers there occupying that part of what is now Ukraine. So the ancient hatred mutated massively when it was a communist country. Then it was the other. It was everything that we were not, we were told. It didn't allow free speech. How ironic. It didn't allow free assembly. It didn't believe in religion. Again, how ironic. It was a godless communist country. So it was easy to get the mass of the population alongside anti-Russian feeling in that time. And this I understand. But what I've never understood, and no one has given me an answer, look, Russia is a white, European, Christian, capitalist country. You know, the kind of country you say you are or you'd like to be. How is it possible that you are unable to get along with them? They have the same kind of economy as you. They are more religious than you. They're more white than you, more European than you. What's not to love for the purposes of the British elite? But boy, do they hate Russia. They loved it only for one brief moment when Boris Yeltsin and Russia were lying drunk on the floor and having their pockets picked. That Russia they liked, but it didn't last long enough. And along came Vladimir Putin.
Well, the thing I don't understand is Tsar Nicholas was cousins, right, with England's
yes.
George V?
Queen Victoria was the grandmother of all three kings that fought the First World War. She was the grandmother of the Kaiser, the grandmother of the Tsar, and the grandmother, of course, of the British king. They could have settled it all around the Christmas dinner table at Sandringham and saved many millions of lives that were lost in the First World War.
Now, I mean, that's the thing that I just don't begin to comprehend, that you've got this family tie, and yet you treat them as if they're some, extraterrestrial being. They have nothing to do, nothing in common.
How do you explain it? The Tsar, he was supposed to rescue the Tsar, and the Bolsheviks were going to look the other way. He was going to be picked up by an English craft and sailed into exile. But the British king ratted on the deal, didn't want him. Perfidious Albion.
They must have had quite a row as young boys or something, because they used to play together, as my understanding.
Yeah. No, it was about competing empires. Russia and Britain had big empires. Germany had none. And under the Kaiser, under Bismarckian leadership, Russian power and strength, they felt that they deserved a place in the sun, just like even the little Dutch had colonies. Yeah. The Belgians had the richest colony of them all, just by default in the Congo. Britain had an empire on which the sun never set. Although, as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, they all had empires, but Germany had none. So it was, I'm afraid, all about the real estate, all about the money.
Well, and that seems to be almost the UK's obsession right now with Ukraine, because of the resources. And that is it correct to say that the UK has basically mortgaged itself in this war and supporting the war in Ukraine against Russia?
Well, look, just the other day, we fired at £2 million a pop, 12 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, for that's what they are. For older viewers, you know, these cruise missiles that we used to march against when Ronald Reagan wanted to sight them in Europe. We sent 12 cruise missiles at £2 million, not dollars, in a country where it's bitterly cold, and our old people have just had their cold weather payments to help them with their heating bills withdrawn, so that thousands of them will perish in this cold winter, according to the government's own statistics. So it is completely bizarre that a country which is so broken financially, it has to steal the coal from its old age pensioners in order to make ends meet, but can waste that kind of money, which turns out, I spoke to Colonel Larry Davis, who told me that these Storm Shadows didn't even hit anything. They were all shot down. None of them hit a target. Talk about burning money. That would have kept our old people warm. And of course, we've promised £3 billion, not dollars, into Zelensky in perpetuity. I mean, who promises anything to anybody in perpetuity? What if circumstances change? Are you still going to give them £3 billion per year? Well, we apparently are. And I don't need to tell you, you know military things better than me. Our armed forces, I don't want to insult them as individuals, but they definitely can't fight Russia.
Yeah, no, they're a joke.
They not fight the Russian ladies team. But you know, they would all fit in to a football stadium here in England. The whole Army, Navy, and Air Force would all fit into one mid-table football stadium.
Yes.
We are just not a military power, and yet we persist in acting as if this were the 19th century, and that by jingo we would be dispatching a gunboat in the morning to bring the the natives back into order. It's an amazing time to be alive, Larry.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that on an individual level, yes, the British military has some exceptional individuals. I've got a good friend over here who was a member of SAS, the Special Air Service, and has decided to come to the United States and take up residency here. He wants to be warm here in Florida, but
you can understand.
But in terms of actual capability and performance, I mean, I call the UK, they're like a toothless little poodle. They're a Florida dog. A Florida dog, if you come here, these tiny little dogs and all they do is make noise and are quite annoying. But they can't inflict any damage. In fact, when you walk them outside, you have to make sure you have them on a leash, not because they're going to attack somebody, because one of the hawks will swoop down and take them off. Yeah, your dog is flying away over the horizon. Oh my God, how am I going to explain this to the wife?
Yes. No, it is a tragic situation. And look where it's led. I mean, God forbid this might be the last time we ever talk, Larry. This can get out of control very, very quickly. And if it gets out of control, then it's curtains for everyone. It's good night, Irene, I'm afraid.
Well, is there no pushback from the Parliament right now with Starmer saying, asking, well, what the hell are you doing? What are you trying to set the world on fire?
Parliament wasn't even told, never mind consulted. Not only was there no vote, there was no murmur. It still has not officially been told that which is in every newspaper in the land. That's the contempt with which the government treat the elected parliament in the country. And frankly, most of them deserve that contempt. If you've got no self-respect, why should anybody else respect you? Right. If you'll allow a government to do whatever it likes, even potentially bring about the end of your country, and you still don't get up on your hind legs and roar, well, why should anyone else respect you? You clearly don't respect yourself in the office that you hold.
Do you have any process akin to, say, an impeachment process, or is it just vote of no confidence is the only way to get rid of a government?
And Starmer has the Gatling gun of 170-seat majority, gained with fewer than a third of the actual votes that were cast, and fewer than a fifth of the total votes existing in the country. How's that for disproportionality? How's that for a mockery of the democratic process? You get 32% of the vote, and you get about 80% of the seats. It's a clown show, and right now under these wartime conditions, they're behaving like a circus.
Well, is there any reaction this morning to the news that apparently the Russians launched a new type of weapon into the conflict in Ukraine? It looks like it was a medium-range ballistic missile with MIRV capability, the multiple independent reentry vehicles. So as the rocket comes down, it splits off into 5, 6, 7 different warheads. And they could be nuclear, but these were not. These were conventional. Has there been any reaction yet in the UK to this?
So far, not in the Parliament, but amongst the public, it has made an impact. I took my kids to school this morning, and several of the parents at the gate were discussing it. So it's the sort of thing that is beginning to get traction, and eventually the media will have to sit up and take note. I think it was not an ICBM, but it was first reported as being an ICBM. Right. Would make the first ICBM ever to be launched in war, and albeit, as you say, not nuclear, but could easily have been, just as easily have been nuclear. In fact, they probably had to take the nuclear weapon off the cone in order to replace it with the conventional one. It turns out, I think it wasn't ICBM, but it was the multiple entry vehicle that you just described so well. And I can tell you that 3 of those are earmarked for the United Kingdom. And they would arrive from the launch point in Kaliningrad in less than 12 minutes in the UK. So with a 12-minute warning, and with 3 of those, each with its multiple warheads, every city in Britain would cease to exist, and every person, every living thing would cease to exist. Well, if that doesn't get you talking at the school gate, I'm not sure what would. Yeah. But I've lived through times when millions of us were on the streets against Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher's governments when they planned to put the Pershing and cruise missiles in Europe for the first time. And such was the state of alarm then that almost spontaneously, millions were on the streets in Britain. But that isn't the case today. And if you ask me why, I'm afraid I'd have to say, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, in fact, when that recalls a memory, because that was when I started working. I entered on duty at CIA in September of '85. And one of the very issues was the deployment of Pershings to Europe and the reaction of the Europeans, the reaction of the Soviets. So, I know exactly what you're
We got out of jail in that period because we now know that the Soviet leadership and the satellite leadership thought that Operation Able Archer was a cover for World War III. They believed sincerely that NATO was about to launch World War III under the cover of war games. And of course, therefore, any human error, misinterpretation, could have led us into the conflict from which there is no return. And here we are, 40 years later, back in the jaws of death again.
No, it's remarkable. I am struck by this, I'll call it the political disconnect. In the United States, if the Congress tried to cut Social Security, tried to deprive senior citizens of essential funds in order to survive the winter, in order to send money to Ukraine, there would be a revolt. And yet, in the UK, you're doing. I thought this was a Monty Python skit. I thought the boys had come back, and it's truly bizarre.
Well, it happened the very next day. Let's call it a Tuesday. On the Tuesday, they announced they were taking the cold weather allowance, which was a pittance, by the way, off the pensioners. And the very next day, the foreign secretary, I call him Eddie Amin, David Lammy, he was in Kiev promising 3 times the amount they had just saved by robbing the pensioners, 3 times more in perpetuity to Kiev. So look at the optics of that. And yet they've gotten away with it. Look, if your IRS had to go door to door to the taxpayers of the United States and say to the householder, okay, you owe me $3,000 to send to Netanyahu and another $3,000 to send to Zelensky. Well, you're a country where people can hold guns. The guns would be out. Nobody would hand over that amount of their household income for these 2 foreigners. Sure. But that's exactly what's happening. Exactly what's happening. Without revolt so far.
Now, is there in the United States right now, there's not a lot of daylight between support for Ukraine and support for Israel. Is there daylight in the UK? Because particularly in light of this ICC issuing at last arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister.
There's a very high level of support in Britain for the Palestinian cause. I'm probably the best person alive that can measure it because I've been in it since 1975, when I can assure you there weren't many of us. You could have fitted all the supporters of the PLO into a smallish hall in London. Now you couldn't fit us into the whole of central London. So we are many millions now. But the British Parliament has never been more powerfully supportive of Netanyahu and Israel. It's a real paradox. One of the many paradoxes that we're discussing here. The British public have never been more pro-Palestinian. The British Parliament has never been more pro-Israel. You don't go on in British politics if you are not a supporter of Israel. I met a fellow once, a Jewish ex-serviceman. He was just on his way with all his medals, on his way to a ceremony in the Cenotaph in London. I got off my campaign bus and he hugged me. And he said, you know, if you'd been with us, you would have been in number 10 Downing Street. And as I released myself from his embrace and shook his hand, I got to thinking, maybe he was right. But I could do no other in any case. But since then, I mean, that was 10 years ago. Since then, it's become even more powerfully skewed towards Israel. And of course, mass media is exactly the same. If I used the G word, genocide, in a mainstream television interview, even imagining that they would put me on the mainstream television anymore.
Right.
The interview would be immediately pulled. They won't allow that word to be used, even though the International Court of Justice found Israel plausibly guilty of that G word. And that's the highest court in the whole world. And I grew up being told that Britain was a law-abiding country and that the law was sacrosanct and applied to everybody. But didn't turn out that way.
Well, does Britain have the comparable entity like the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, where they're funneling money and basically buying political goodwill, or what would account for the Parliament's obsequiousness?
We have many rather than just one, and they are very powerful, and there is money involved. But I've got to tell you, Larry, it's more easily explained in your case. A politician that gets 6-7 figure numbers from a lobbying organization perfectly legally. As a politician myself, I can understand how that happened. What I can't understand is in Britain, where the money is, by comparison, tuppence halfpenny. You live in a country where you need $1.5 billion to make a run for the presidency and lose it, as Kamala Harris did. We live in a country where the maximum spend in a local constituency to elect a single member of parliament is less than $20,000. Imagine that. The maximum spend, probably $18,000. And so there's no point in raising more than that because you can't spend it. If you spend it illicitly and you're caught, you'll not only go to prison, you'll be banned from politics forever and so on. So money isn't remotely as big an elephant in the room in British politics, which makes it less explicable. In other words, they're not doing it for the money. And if it was about money, the pro-Arab side of things could easily double, triple, quadruple, quintuple the money that they're getting from these pro-Israel organizations, and it would do them no good in any case. So it isn't about the money, which means it is about something else. Now, the most charitable thing you can say is that it's a resonance of the Holocaust when European and North American countries, including your own, slammed the door shut in the face of the Jews that sought to flee from what turned into the gas chambers, the death camps, the Holocaust. That's the most charitable thing you can say. Although knowing these people as I do, charitability is not the first quality that I would generally ascribe to them. So we must search on for reasons. Compromat, as the Russians used to say, often comes in. And you live in not just the land, but the state in which Epstein began. The collection of compromising material on politicians is a pretty effective way, as any viewer of, fiction on TV, drama, and so on. You already know how it can work. You do something you shouldn't have done, of which you are ashamed, and that would finish you in politics, maybe even worse than that, and somebody's got it on tape, then that person has a hold over you, which it's pretty hard to buck. I try to do nothing of which I'm ashamed. Someone asked me the other day, what's the difference between embarrassed and ashamed? I said, well, if you found me in bed with my wife, I'd be embarrassed. If you found me in bed with your wife, I'd be ashamed. There is a difference.
Very well said.
So compromise is one explanation. Maybe there's money in brown envelopes under the table that doesn't get declared and therefore renders null and void the points I was making earlier. I don't have evidence of that. By definition, you'd struggle to get evidence of that. It may be that there is a bit of Holocaust memory involved, but it's most likely that we do it because the Americans tell us to. And that's, if you like, the long and the short of British foreign policy now. We are the tail of the American dog. And the head went in first. Mad Dog Biden sent your cruise missiles in first, and we were the tail of the dog the next day, going in with ours.
Well, I'd like to challenge you on that and suggest, because a lot of what I've seen over the last, 14, 15 years would appear that, even though, as you correctly noted, England is a weak military power, despite its, pretensions that, yes, we're powerful. But it would appear that in several cases, the United States has been following the lead of the UK. An example was, let's go back to the start of the civil war in Syria. It appears to me that the UK played a much more influential role in getting the United States to come along with overthrowing the government of Bashar al-Assad. I remember the white helmets appeared to have been more of a British intelligence operation than a CIA operation.
I don't think our two opinions are contradictory. It's undoubtedly the case that in the US, as in any country, there are different camps. There are camps that want to have a go. Tulsi Gabbard didn't want to get involved in the war in Syria, but other people in the political class did.
Yes.
And the British state, the deep state, acts on the part of the US administration that it needs to encourage and prod into taking the action that we, wiser counsel, Greece to your Rome, and all that bollocks, that we think you should be following. And it goes back a lot longer, of course, than Syria. In the case of Gulf War I, first invasion of Iraq, when George Bush was told, the original George Bush, was told by Mrs. Thatcher, this is no time to go wobbly, George. The British are always more gung-ho. That's true. And in Yugoslavia, the same thing happened. Undoubtedly, Blair was the driver of Clinton in the Yugoslav war. Mm-hmm. Was true then in Gulf War II, also. Was true in Desert Fox in 98, the precursor to Gulf War II. It was the British the British side that was driving the aggression. But in the end, when you say jump, we can only say how high.
Yeah. Well,
We have no other option than that. We are the vassal of all vassals because we pathetically seek your attention like one of these Florida dogs that
yeah.
you educated me about at the beginning of this interview.
Well, I think the next couple of weeks, and I don't want to be overly dramatic, but are going to be really significant historically in terms of determining the future of NATO and maybe the future of the world, because both with the United States authorizing the firing of the ATACMS deeper into Russia, and then Britain hopping right on that bandwagon with the Storm Shadows going in. There are two more today, as my understanding. They were both shot down. So, another 4 million pounds gone. That I expect a pretty strong response by Russia, not with nuclear yet. It'll be conventional, but I think it's the kind of conventional strike that will tempt NATO to want to go further. And if they go further, then all of a sudden, I think we're spinning off into a very dangerous area. Do you agree?
Yes, for sure. That's why I say this could be the last time we talk. It's not over dramatic. If battle is joined, of course it will begin with conventional weapons. Although we both know there are conventional weapons and there are conventional weapons. There are conventional weapons that pack such a punch that they are almost at the nuclear threshold. But either way, as soon as one side begins to prevail, the other side has no option but to escalate the weaponry involved until it is an existential matter. Because for the Russians, this is all existential. You're protected by two great oceans, although you're not protected from ICBMs, and every city in the US could eventually be incinerated also, but not first of all. But for Europe, this is absolutely at the threshold of existential now.
Yeah.
Because if shooting war between NATO and Russia directly breaks out, then the only way is up from there. Either Russia wins and all these self-fulfilling prophecies of Russia wanting to get back to Berlin and so on happen, or Russia loses, in which case it will have to launch its nuclear fleet, or it will cease to exist at no cost to the other side. And Putin's not that sort of guy.
Yeah, no, I agree. The thing, in fact, I believe the reason the United States foreign policy, has been so aggressive, so prone to engage in war over the last 60 years, so 70 years now almost, we've never really paid a cost. I mean, a human cost. We lost 58,000 in Vietnam, and I don't want to minimize that loss, but that was over, a 15-year period. That's nothing. We lose that many in traffic accidents in 1 year. So it's like, because the Americans have never paid that price, we've got to, it's like a kid playing a video game. We think we can do it, and, it's just, in fact, we become wealthy out of it. That's the sick part about it, George. We become wealthy out of it.
Well, some people do. And of course, for the poor bloody infantry, their cost was 100%. Their bones, their blood, for nothing, and certainly not for their own interests and the interests of their own people. So you're right, and the same is true here in Britain. I mean, we're used to launching wars against people who are not in a position to fight back.
Yeah.
With weapons against which they cannot defend. But that's not Russia.
Yeah.
Many people have invaded Russia and have bitterly regretted it on their way to the political grave and millions to their actual grave. The humiliation of Napoleon from at the gates of Moscow, the encirclement of Von Paulus and his army at Stalingrad, the defeat at Kursk, the crushing of the beast in Berlin, are all distant memories. The only people like thee and me that still watch the World War II documentaries. My wife keeps saying to me, "Why are you watching that again?" I say, "Because I like the way it ends. I like the ending. It's a happy ending for me."
Yeah.
But the mass of the people are not watching these documentaries.
No,
because they know nothing of war. I have been with my face pressed into the ground, trying to make my profile smaller as bombs were falling all around me, and as razor sharp, red hot fragments of steel were flying all around me, sheets of flying glass everywhere, people crying out in pain. I've been there. I know what war is, and so do you.
Yeah.
That's why we hate it so.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we can do to counter that is that people will continue to listen to you. I've taken enough of your time today, but I encourage people to tune into the mother of all talk shows. It is truly something worth it. It is must watch, and it brings it at least brings some hope to people. And you have a unique skill. I'm not here to I'm not trying to curry favor with you and hoping that you'll take me out on a date or to dinner, but.
We're both too old for that, Larry.
But you've been a remarkable orator and a skilled debater and a formidable person in presenting points of view. So just keep it up, George. That's all I ask.
Thank you, Larry. Pleasure.
Thanks for doing this. We'll be back in touch.
Pleasure.
George Galloway is a remarkable individual. Please follow him at his show, Moats, the mother of all talk shows. I hope you enjoyed this. Hit the like and subscribe button. I'm Larry Johnson, and this was today's episode of Countercurrents. Thank you.